Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining.
Good evening.
Hi, sorry. First of all, I do want to apologize for the delay. We're having some technical issues. I think I had the wrong meeting invite. So you guys were waiting here. I was in another meeting waiting for everybody, and I was worried that people were not going to show up. So just want to apologize from that standpoint. And perhaps I believe someone sent an email saying that they're in and there's nobody here. We're going to rectify that issue, and I'm glad that we'll be moving forward. We're able to proceed. Once again, welcome everybody, and a very good evening to you all. Welcome to the OLE Consulting Mentorships session. Today's session, as usual, we're going to start with some housekeeping. Today's session is on Agile Delivery. So today we're going to be talking about Agile Delivery. But before we proceed, we're going to start with some housekeeping. Housekeeping today, if you're not speaking, please put your mic on mute. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And if you like to wait, again, we do ask during this presentation, we keep our questions to ourselves, or we keep your mic on mute. And at the end of the session, at the end of the presentation, we'll have a section for Q&A. Before we proceed, I guess without further ado, we'll get started. Again, welcome everybody. Today's session is a very interesting one because, based on general knowledge, based on what's going on in the industry today, project delivery has shifted towards Agile delivery method. And I hope that today's session, folks are going to learn the concept of Agile, and you can start putting that into practice. So the first step I'll talk about here is to go over the overview of Agile. Agile is a way to manage projects, and it can be used for virtually anything, but founded in the software development space. But any project, any sort of activity that you have going on, you can implement using Agile. And the concept of using Agile is really to find a more efficient way to deliver projects. And what do we mean by efficient ways to deliver projects? Well, the concept of Agile talks about agility in the delivery, and also talks about breaking larger projects into smaller, manageable chunks that can be easily managed or delivered. So for example, instead of talking about this big project that we're trying to implement, can we break it down into different components? And these small components are like mini projects, and we can better figure out those mini projects versus taking on a whole large scope. We're also talking about the product produced during each iteration can easily go to market. For example, if we're talking about enhancement of a website, for example, let's say the OLE Consulting website, we're trying to enhance this or revamp the entire website versus saying, okay, we're going to take on this big project to revamp the entire project. We can take it page by page. We enhance little areas, before you know it, the entire application is being enhanced. So maybe we might say, okay, let's start with the program page, training program page. So students, when they're coming in, they can get a new experience. Now we know by the time we enhance that page, the students can start experiencing it. We're already getting value for it. So the go-to-market component of Agile is also a value to be, it's sort of value that's reason why people pick Agile versus Waterfall. Today, we're going to go through some practical stuff. We're going to start with some general understanding of the concept of Agile, and then we'll transition towards a more practical approach. And then we'll look at having you on a project. What's the process? If you're on a project today, how do you go about it? What are some of the tools? What are some of the resources required? In this Agile space, and in today's environment, how do I get a job? What sort of jobs are out there? I know a lot of you guys are interested in getting a job, but then, and that's why it's important to start talking about, to start thinking, execution. How do I execute in an agile framework, in an agile environment? What does that look like from a day-to-day task perspective? What does that look like? And now when you look beyond the day-to-day task, you now start thinking, okay, if I want to get a job, what would they want to know? The employer wants to know how you go about it. What are some of the steps you're going to take to get to end of job? So we're going to talk about some of those steps here today. Now, unlike waterfall, which is strictly sequential in nature, agile, helps you, breaks things down in a different fashion, and we're going to talk about it. And again, the diagrams here that will help bring this point home. One of the things you want to know: the agile goal, the agile manifesto. Agile values are one, individuals and interaction over processes and tools. Now, with waterfall, which is traditional project management or software development framework, it's very process oriented, is very rigor, very structured. Whereas agile, they want to make things lighter. They want things to be easier for people to understand, to be able to deliver and know exactly what we're delivering. Agile also favors working software over comprehensive documentation. Now, within the waterfall framework, there's a lot of documentation. You have huge documents that people don't even read, very complex documentation, prone to errors, huge documentation. But then Agile, we're just talking about, okay, what can we deliver within the next 2 weeks? And everybody understands what it is that we're delivering. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Again, with Agile, on a regular basis, you're meeting with the customer, you're meeting with the end user, you're trying to understand what it is that they want. What should we take? What should we add into the software? What should we remove from the software? Responding to change over following a plan. So as we're talking about what should we add, what should we remove, we want to quickly make those changes as on the fly, so it's easier. And I'll just, this diagram here depicts the distinction between your waterfall model versus your agile model. Now, as you can see on the diagram here, the waterfall model is very sequential in nature. So we talk about document. This is a huge project. Our goal is to document all the requirements for this project, and we'll focus on documenting those requirements, no matter how big the requirements are, before we move into design. And then we'll focus on design, and then we'll move to development, and then we'll do testing, and then deploy. Now, the concept of Agile is saying, well, versus taking on the entire scope and documenting requirement before moving from one state to another, let's just pick a small chunk. Do the same thing, requirement, design, development, testing, but then it's a smaller scope. And then we can quickly deploy this. Now, to deploy this whole project from a waterfall standpoint might take us a year, maybe even more. But then we might say from an agile standpoint, can we get this done within a couple of months? Now, what that means is we can go to market and we can start seeing the return. The business can start getting the value out of the project and then move on to the next one. And now what's interesting, one of the value of Agile is the fact that you also understand real time what the market is saying. So there's market analysis. Now, if you're looking at waterfall, maybe we have a requirement here that we wanted last year, but now we're trying to implement this year. We realize that the requirement is no longer valuable, but then we've done a lot of work on it. So with Agile allows you to make those informed changes because we understand what the market is saying. We might say, okay, for the next iteration, let's make this change because we understand we can respond to the market factors. So some of the benefits of Agile, versus waterfall. Now, this is just to give you guys some form of background, some form of baseline to understand the landscape of the concept of Agile, versus waterfall. Now let's talk about the entire, makeup of an Agile team. So first thing first, we need to understand, okay, who are we dealing with? The first stakeholder you want to know within an Agile framework is your product owner. the product owner represents a business interest or customer's interest, and they make decisions on behalf of the business. They make decisions around what features should be included in a sprint. We're going to talk about a sprint later on. They make decisions around what features, how to prioritize the delivery. Now, the product owner represents the business, so they might tell us, you know what, the business wants this piece to be delivered within the next 3 months. So we're going to prioritize that. As long as considering, as the product owner is telling us what to prioritize, you also have the technical guys on the team. They'll tell you whether or not that is feasible. So there's a balancing act in that area, right? Because you have the technical folks might tell you, the client might want us to deliver. I always use this portal, having an admin, the clients, customer, all the different portals. These guys might tell you, you need to deliver the admin portal first before you go into the partner portal. So there's a balancing act. So the product owner helps to identify, they work closely with the analyst. They work closely with the business analyst to document the requirement, prioritize the requirement. Essentially, those requirements will be set out in the backlog, in the product backlog, which will be captured, which will include all the features in the product, all the features that we want to roll out in the product. So the business analyst and product owner work closely together, can see, supports product owner in gathering business needs and problems, interact with stakeholders. So essentially their job is to understand, what do we need for this product? What are some of the features we want to implement in this product? They document it, they work closely with a product owner. So they might identify maybe 20 features or 100 features. And then some of the things that they'll be doing now is say, okay, out of this 100, which ones do we want to deliver first? Which ones do we want to deliver as part of the first 3 months? So we start the prioritization process, start working out. We start working out the prioritization process. And the prioritization process will also help us define what we call an MVP. We're going to talk about that. And then you also have the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master leads planning, facilitates ceremonies, manages everything. So the Scrum Master plays the role of a project manager, similar role as a project manager. They're the ones that facilitate, run the show, pretty much, work closely with everybody on the group. Work closely with the product owner, the analyst, the QA, the developer, and the architects, just to ensure that everything is going on accordingly. And then you have the architect. They define the they define all the product architecture. They help you with the technical decision making, which gives you a broader picture of how the solution would interact with other existing systems or applications. So, and then your developers, they're the ones that complete all the development or build of the product. And then the QA, quality assurance people, once these guys build, they conduct testing. This is going to give us an overview of the roles. Again, this will come to everybody eventually. So now that we understand the makeup of a team, the question is, where do we start from? It's interesting because one thing I think the last mentorship session we had, we talked about project leadership. Now, one of the things that we talked about within project leadership is, where do we start from? It's always important to know where we're starting from. What's the plan? How do we go about things? How do we identify where we're going? So we need to have a starting point. Now, in this case, the starting point is coming up with a product roadmap. Now, your product roadmap gives you a sense of what needs to be delivered when. So you're starting off, and I talked about, and you can break your project into multiple work streams. As you can see on this diagram, we have 2 work streams. Work stream 1 has a roadmap. Work stream 2 has a roadmap. Now, the job of the product owner and the business analyst is to figure out which piece are we delivering first. And they go in and gather the requirement, they document those requirements, put them in the product backlog. We're going to show you an example product backlog later on in this presentation. They put everything in the backlog, and then we start going into the backlog to pick what we're going to deliver maybe within the next 2 weeks or the next 3 weeks. So we're going through that exercise, but the starting point is to come up with a roadmap that gives us an idea of where we're going, what we're going to be focusing on at every given point in time. So this roadmap could be, now what we have is just a 4 months roadmap. It could be up to 1 year roadmap that gives us an idea of some of the things that will be delivered. So you can see theme 1 is part of workstream 1. Theme 2 is part of workstream 2. Theme 3 is, we can see what's being delivered when, and allows the team to focus. So really interesting. Okay, all right. So we talked about product roadmap. Again, product roadmap or release plan gives you an idea, gives you a sense of where to start from, where to pick things from, how to go about it. Where do we start from? Where do we pick things from? It starts with a product roadmap. So just wanted to start with that. Okay, so product roadmap, I think, again, I would love for you guys to hold your questions. Questions help clarify things, and we can talk about this. And some of the things you want to also know is there's theme, there's epics, there's features. Those are things that we'll talk about. Now, following your product roadmap, you also need to establish what is your minimum viable product. Now, we figure out the roadmap. The roadmap might tell us, okay, some key chunks of functionalities or components of the project that will be delivered at different times. But the other thing is to also establish what do we consider an MVP. An MVP is a version of your product with just enough features to satisfy early customers and provide feedback for future product development. So, for example, maybe for a project, we might say an MVP is the enter order. So if we can have this feature here, can we implement this within the next 3 months? Yeah, maybe we can. Yeah, let's do that. So that becomes an MVP. Or another MVP could be process order. Or maybe we want our MVP to be manage orders. Will be the minimum viable product that satisfies the customer, maybe because they might say, well, what's the point of entering order if we can't process order? Which makes logical sense, right? So your MVP helps you to, that is that minimum viable product. And now for this MVP, you might need to go through maybe 3 sprints, 4 sprints, 5 sprints. And we'll talk about what a sprint means afterwards. But the minimum viable product is really important to define that, because that's one thing that would define when we go to market. Now, we've talked about product roadmap, which is a starting point. We need to know what the roadmap is. It gives us an idea of what's being delivered when. Now, once we're clear on the roadmap, and that roadmap also helps us establish what an MVP would be. Once we're clear on that, the team needs to get to work. And the starting point on getting to work is documenting the product backlog. The product backlog will be where all the features and all the requirements will be situated. And then going forward, we're going to start prioritizing as we need, prioritizing as we see fit. So we say, okay, well, for this next 2 weeks, let's identify the features that we're going to work on. So product backlog is a list of all the product features generally defined by user stories. User stories defines everything potentially a user wants to do. So a user story is saying, well, as a user, I want to be able to log into a portal. As a user, I want to be able to transfer money from one account to another bank account. As a user, I want to be able to place orders when I log into my client portal. So many things. So user stories help us to break down this concept easily, because, and this is an example. So you need to define things properly. You can see as a user, that's a type of user. what do you want to do? So and the example here says, as a sales rep, I want to search for my customers by first and last name so that I can pull up their details. So these are sort of things that you have when you're talking about the backlog. There are many tools to track your product backlog. So one of the things that the most important thing is making sure that they're easily accessible. One of the tools that we talk about and we recommend is Jira. Industry standard tool is Jira. We're going to talk about Jira. We're going to show you some examples in Jira. So user stories, very important in your product backlog. And this is just talking about product backlog refinement. One of the things that you find, one of the activities when you're talking about product backlog is product backlog refinement. Product backlog refinement is when the analyst and the product owner meet regularly. And we're going to talk about these things in a practical way soon. The analyst and the product owner meet regularly to talk about the product backlog. They refine, does it meet definition already? Does it meet definition of, is it good to go? Have we spelled out all the acceptance criteria? Those are things we'll talk about during product backlog refinement. And again, creating your product backlog, the product owner leads the discovery activities to understand and shape customer experience needed to support planned work item in partnership with technology. Product owner leads exercise to decompose work items into epics through story mapping while considering technical feasibility and implications. I think we talked about the technical feasibility because, again, as much as we want to implement certain features, or we like to implement certain features, we need to also consider the technical implications, which could also serve as roadblocks. So the epic is a bigger picture of what needs to be done. In this case, your epic will be the feature. A feature could be user management as a feature, whereas under user management, there are multiple user stories in terms of what the user wants to be able to perform under user management. And then you have the task. The task is, the functions or the functions we want the solution provider or the developers to add into the application. For example, add the button, add button to remove items from my cart, to open my cart, so things of that nature. We'll get into the basics and the details of it. Again, it's really good to understand these things. We're also talking about story mapping, which is the systematic decomposition of your backlog items into from the bigger picture from your release to epics to user stories. So now we started with product roadmap, and I like to do this recap, quite often so that everyone's clear. We started with product roadmap, then we talked about product backlog, which is where we document all the requirements and the features, and we break them down from features to user stories, and then we're talking about, we talked about product backlog refinement, which is an exercise to make sure that all the user stories in our backlog is complete and meets what we're looking for. And then now we're talking about sprint planning. Now, your sprint planning exercise is designed to figure out what work needs to be done within a sprint. Agile rules is your sprints should be, within 2 to 3 weeks to complete. So we figure out what task. You don't want the sprint to be too big. You don't want the scope to be too big, to be too complex. So we'll figure out what task do we need to complete. What features are we bringing in? And then what are some of the activities, who's involved to complete this sprint? So it's a little tricky here, guys. It's a little tricky, but we'll break it down further This diagram depicts everything we're talking about. Team capacity, some of the things you need to know. What's our team capacity? Who's on our team? What's our velocity? Velocity, sometimes, you might not know, depends on the team velocity changes. Velocity really deals with how efficiently your team is working. Stories, meeting, definition of ready. So definition of ready is something that is done in the previous exercise when there's a product refinement is being done by the product owner and the analyst. They're reviewing the product, the user stories, to make sure that they meet the definition of ready. You also need to figure out what sort of the dependencies on other groups, which other groups needs to be involved. Do they know? Are they aware that we're about to roll out? Because we don't want to start and then start chasing people that are not aware of what needs to be done. And the objective is to maximize the utilization of available capacity, which is your available resources. Review and confirm as a team which stories will be committed to the sprint. So what are we delivering? We can all agree and we know who needs to do what. And then we break down the stories into tasks. We talked about that earlier, breaking the story into tasks, add button, add this, add that. And obviously output is to confirm current sprint backlog. So what are some of the items in this current sprint that needs to be completed? User stories broken into tasks. Again, the workflow here captures, again, what the essence of what we're talking about. Now, this diagram here also speaks to what we're talking about. Again, what we talked about earlier, we start with a product roadmap. Once we're clear on the product roadmap, we're focusing on this first one. And with this first one, we're now break it into multiple sprints. Then sprint 1 or 2, we can now figure out what features are going to be involved in the sprint. In this case, there are 5 features. And then for each feature, we now need to break those features into tasks that will be completed by the team. So this kind of explains it. And this sprint can be like 2 or 3 weeks, and we figure out another one 2 or 3 weeks. Again, essentially you get one release done, or maybe your MVP can be done within a 3 months or 4 months period, depending on how quickly the team is moving. Again, your team velocity is also very important. Now, so let's say for now, we've gotten through the backlog where we document all the features and user stories. We figure out, okay, what's going on. Backlog, we have the backlog. The product owner and the business analyst, they've done the backlog refinement. So we know that, okay, as we're going into this sprint, the user stories meet definition already. Now we've done sprint planning. We've now figured out, okay, we're going to go into sprints. We figure out the features now. We know the features are going to be implemented for this sprint. We know the tasks that are involved. What's next? The next thing is to have your daily stand-up. Your daily stand-up is your regular touch point on a daily basis. Shouldn't be more than 15, 20 minutes long. We just touch base to figure out, okay, what's going on? What are you working on? What's the status? Are there any impediments? Are there any roadblocks? So this is a regular meetings where we're looking at, okay, the user stories. There's a board here. Again, I'll show you one that we have on Jira. Tells you what do we have under to do, what do we have under in progress, what's done. There might be other categories that we might capture. And we'll talk about 15 minutes daily standard mandatory, 3 questions for each team member. What have you achieved yesterday? What will you do today? Does anything hinder me or the team to reach our sprint goal? So those are some of the things I want to do. Ideally, everyone's touching base to just give an update on what's going on. If there are any issues, we point them out. So daily stand-up, some of the things that you want to keep in mind: interaction, collaboration. Again, Agile Manifesto, the Agile principles promote collaboration. So collaborating amongst different roles is key to the success of the project or your Agile pod. Several practices keep in mind: interaction between roles. You can see the testers and the dev guys are interacting. Now, why would the dev guy interact with the test guy? These guys are building, these guys are testing. So there's got to be some interaction, documentation that they will be sharing with each other, share test cases, sit side by side to review what's been done. You might tell me this feature is working. As I test it, I tell you it's not working. Okay, let's sit together, let's check it out. And the dev guy might fix it on the spot. And you see interaction between the BAs and the dev guys. So the BAs and the dev guys also interact, and BAs are talking about, really the BAs are clarifying the requirements, just making sure that these guys are building what the client wants. Essentially, and if they have any technical issues, make sure that they're resolved. The dev guys might have questions about the user story. Maybe, I need clarification on this user story. It's not clear. Can you explain what exactly you want us to do here? So again, this will be an ongoing conversation. And you look at the testers and the BAs also. Again, clarification on the acceptance criteria. The BAs have to provide clarity so that the testers, when they're testing, they have clarity on what they are looking for, what the outcome of the testing is. So this part is very important, but we're going to move on. Sprint review, obviously, let's say, for example, we expect that daily stand-up, we've done our sprint planning, we know what needs to be delivered for this sprint, and we have our daily stand-ups where we're reviewing the work that needs to be done, we're clear on what people need to do, and we get to the end of the sprint. At the end of the sprint, there's a sprint review or show and tell. So the goal of this sprint review is to showcase what has been built and ensure that everyone's involved, everyone's aware of what has been built. So again, it's often done as a demonstration where the team gets to see what has been built, and everyone's involved to see the outcome of what has been completed. Following the sprint review is a sprint retrospective. The sprint retrospective really is designed to showcase, is designed for the team to reflect and capture some of the lessons learned in the sprint. Because what have we done? What have we been able to do? What are some of the areas we can improve upon? We want to be able to capture that in the sprint retrospective. I'm trying to move faster because I know we started late. So sprint retrospective is really, purpose is to review what they did in the previous sprint, create positive pressure on team to appreciate what has been done. So again, we'll look at concrete measures for next steps or next sprints, areas of improvement, things of that nature. And finally, we have sprint execution. The sprint life cycle here, we're talking about the entire process from the beginning. Number one step is input from stakeholders are incorporated into the project or product backlog. We talk about, this is where we start with the product backlog, and we have your product backlog, product owner and the analysts prioritize the product backlog. We support from the team. Team commits to delivering items from the backlog. Again, during sprint planning, we figured out how many features we're going to pick from the product backlog, and then we move on to the next stage, which is we start developing, start testing, which is during the sprint, active sprint. And number 5, we'll talk about, daily stand-up. That's when we're getting updates on the work that has been completed. Number 6, product owner showcases and gets feedback of work on the sprint review. So sprint review will showcase what has been built, and then we might say, hey, areas of improvement here and there. And finally, team discuss areas of improvement during your sprint retrospective. So this in its sense gives you an idea, and then you see the sprint is 2 to 4 weeks. Gives you an idea of the end-to-end process. So on that note, we will, I don't want to say switch gears because we're not switching gears yet. I'll switch, we're going to switch gears actually. We'll switch gears to this side of things, which speaks to some of the things we're talking about. This is Jira. And we talked about the starting point. Obviously, the real starting point is your product roadmap, really. The product roadmap that gives us an idea of which feature, which components we're going to be focusing on. And then once we're clear on the roadmap and we figure out some of the MVPs that we want, we're going to start with product backlog, which is what the product owner and the analyst will do. They document the requirement. Now here on this right-hand side are the features, but every feature has its corresponding user story. You can see the user story. The feature here is registration page. Now, the user story is staff should be able to create their login accounts on the registration page. Now, what's also interesting to note is we talked about this product backlog being documented by the product owner and the analyst. And we also talk about the concept of definition of ready. Now, the concept of definition of ready is within each product backlog, and I'm just user story, the definition of ready from their standpoint is, do we have our acceptance criteria? So for example, this one here meets definition of ready because we already have the acceptance criteria. Now, if there's anyone here that doesn't have acceptance criteria, then doesn't meet definition of ready. For example, this one doesn't have its acceptance criteria, but the ones here already have the acceptance criteria, so they meet definition of ready. So once you meet definition of ready, the question is now, okay, let's go into sprint planning. And during the sprint planning, we might decide that, okay, we want to work on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 features or so. And each feature will have its user story. And we just move everything, drag everything into an active sprint. This is kind of like a drag and drop, drag it into an active sprint. And we drag it, and then we have all the items in the active sprint. So now let's go into the active sprint. This is what the workflow looks like for the active sprint. In the active sprint, I have my to-do. Now this is a test document project. So you can see there's activities all over here, but typically you should only have items in the to-do, and then as you move on, you can start moving them into in-progress testing or done. So you have all the to-do items, you move from to-do to in-progress. I can just drag and drop, drag and drop. I can drop this here, is a drag and drop. I can drop it back. So drag and drop. You move it from to-do to in progress. At your daily stand-up, you're talking to the team to find out, okay, what's going on? What's the status of this? Oh, has it been completed? Okay, let's move it to testing so the testers can start testing it. And from testing, once the testers are done testing, if it's good, we move it to done. And we also want to be talking to the team. So, okay, when do you want to start some of these items in the to-do? Are you going to start this? Okay, you started this. Okay, boom, let's move it to in progress. So that gives the logic of the Agile concept that we talked about. We, starting with the backlog, we engaging stakeholders to document the backlog. From backlog, there's, the backlog refinement where the product owner and the analyst will review and make sure that things are good. And then the team commits to the sprint. The sprint, we start. Once we have an active sprint, then the activity here is taking place at the daily stand-up. And again, ultimately, we want to have a show and tell, we want to have a sprint review where we showcase an existing application. And perhaps maybe I can show you one application that we are working on. So this could be us showcasing, okay, what we've built, and we might show the team what we've done, or we can tell you, okay, the user management page is built. We might want to find out about some other page, and we might see that, oh, is this built yet, or is it not built? And we can provide feedback. For example, now I'm clicking on this, is not ready yet, but they can tell me the user management page is done. Okay, let's test it. Can I view a user profile? Yes, I can view. What else can I see under the user profile? I can see their profile. I can see their workflow, which shows me what's going on with this user. This user has done some assessment. Okay, I can see a profile creation, job application, onboarding. This will kind of give you a sense of what people go through in our placement program. They go through an assessment. For you to get into the placement program, you have to go through an assessment. Then we have your profile development, which talks about profile, resume, all this mock interview, good stuff. Then job application, and ultimately land your job, perhaps maybe with RBC. So that's about it, guys. I think at this junction, I'm just going to stop and open the floor for questions. So I think we do have a few people, a few comments in the chat. I'm just going to see if there's any question, any questions at this point. Okay, so we'll stop the recording for now.